The Pacific Northwest, revered for its beauty, cascading mountains, rolling waves, and gorgeous sunsets, attract many tourists from all over the world. Experts warn that we could experience one of the worst natural disasters in our modern-day history. An earthquake with the power to be so destructive, Pacific Northwest locals often refer to its impending doom as the big one.
The Pacific Northwest is breathtaking. Towering forests, rugged cliffs, and waves that stretch forever. Tourists flock here, unaware that beneath their feet lies a fault line primed to snap. For over 3 centuries, pressure has been quietly building, setting the stage for a magnitude 9 earthquake that could level cities and drown coastlines. Scientists call it the Cascadia Subduction Zone. Locals call it the Big One. But what no one expects, you'll have less than 20 minutes to outrun the wave when it hits.
The Cascadia Megaquake will likely be the biggest disaster to ever hit the United States. But new research now shows that it could be way worse than we once thought.
A sleeping giant beneath the waves. You ever stand on a beach, take in the waves, the fresh Pacific air, and think, man, this place is perfect. That's what most people say when they visit the Pacific Northwest. Cascading mountains, misty coastlines, sunsets that feel like poetry. But what they don't realize is, this whole region is sitting on a loaded weapon. A geological trap that's been cocked and quiet for more than 3 centuries. Right under their feet, buried beneath the calm waters off the coast, is a fault line over 1,000 kilometers long. It's called the Cascadia Subduction Zone, and it stretches from Vancouver Island all the way down to Northern California. You've probably heard of it in passing, maybe even joked about the Big One.
The big one.
Big one. Big one.
The big one?
What most people think of as the big one is a magnitude 9 subduction earthquake that would occur just west of Vancouver Island.
But this isn't just a local threat. It's one of the most dangerous fault lines on Earth. 2 tectonic plates, the Juan de Fuca and the North American, are grinding against each other right now, slowly, relentlessly, around 4 to 6 centimeters a year. That might sound like nothing, but over 320 years? That's a mountain of pressure just waiting to break. And when it does, scientists say it could trigger a magnitude 9.0 earthquake, followed by a tsunami so massive it could erase entire coastlines. Not damage, erase. We're talking about waves up to 10 stories tall, slamming into cities, towns, beaches, and doing it in minutes, not hours. Still think this is just fear-mongering? Japan's 2011 Tohoku quake? That was a magnitude 9.1.
In 2011, Japan was hit by a magnitude 9 earthquake, similar to what we're anticipating here on the West Coast.
It killed nearly 20,000 people and caused the Fukushima nuclear meltdown. That disaster came from a fault just like Cascadia. The only difference? Cascadia has been locked even longer. And here's the thing, cities like Vancouver, Victoria, and Portland, they're sitting alarmingly close to this fault. Vancouver is only about 150 kilometers from the zone. That's close enough for the ground to roar and buildings to sway for minutes on end. But here's where it gets real. Recent studies are now showing we might have underestimated it. Some areas off Vancouver Island are actually smoother than expected, meaning the plates could slide more violently when they go. More slip, more shaking, more destruction. Professor John Cassidy, a seismologist who's been studying this fault for over 3 decades, put it bluntly. You can only bend a stick for so long before it snaps. And once it snaps, everything changes. Because this story, it's not just theory. We've seen it happen before. Proof in the past, legends and evidence align. So, let's talk about the last time this fault snapped, because it did snap. And the records are chilling, not just from textbooks, but from 2 completely different worlds, ancient indigenous stories and centuries-old Japanese documents. The date was January 26, 1700. Time, exactly 9 p.m.
This was hundreds of years ago, but it might surprise you that we know exactly when this happened. 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on January 26, 1700.
And here's where it gets weird. Thousands of kilometers across the Pacific Ocean, in Japan, massive tsunami waves crashed into coastal towns. But there was no earthquake recorded anywhere in their region. None. The Japanese called it an orphan tsunami, a wave with no known parent. But modern science traced it back across the Pacific, straight to the Cascadia Subduction Zone. At the same time, indigenous communities up and down the Pacific Northwest already knew what had happened. They didn't need a seismograph to tell them. They had stories, passed down from generation to generation, of the earth shaking so hard it knocked people to the ground, of waves taller than trees sweeping entire villages into the sea. The Makah Nation, the Quileute, the Huayat, the Nucha-Nulth, all of them told the same story. One story from the Tukwat Nation said the ground rolled like waves, and the sea came to claim what was not hers. That's not poetry. That's a first-hand disaster log, just in a different language. And then, in the 1990s, Western scientists finally caught up. Tree ring analysis from dead forests, known as ghost forests, lined up perfectly with 1700. So did layers of sand buried deep in coastal marshes.
So this is the pre-1700 buried soil. Again, I don't know if you can see it on film, but I could feel it, and I can see it by eye.
So did carbon-dated sediments pulled from the ocean floor. Turns out, this wasn't a one-off. At least 19 major earthquakes have struck this fault in the last 10,000 years. Roughly one every 4 to 5 centuries. Do the math. The last one was over 320 years ago. We're right in the danger zone. And here's the part that should make anyone in the region take a breath. Scientists now say there's a 1 in 10 chance the next big one could hit within the next 50 years. Vancouver alone has over 2.6 million people. Most of them live or work in buildings never designed for this kind of shaking.
The good news is Vancouver has been preparing, but now recognizes a gap in certain types of buildings in Vancouver, especially those that house the city's renters.
Not for a tremor, not a jolt, for 5 minutes of full-force chaos. That's why we're heading straight into the danger window, because when the shaking finally stops, that's when the real countdown begins. Minutes to escape. The tsunami. Countdown begins. So let's say the ground starts to shake. You're in Tofino, maybe out on the beach, soaking up that salty air. The sand jolts, trees sway. You hear a low rumble building into a roar. Your first thought might be, it's an earthquake. But what you might not realize is, that's your only warning. Because if this is the big one, you've got less than 20 minutes before something much worse hits. Not a second quake, a wall of water. See, the Cascadia fault isn't like the distant quakes that give you hours before a tsunami rolls in. This one's right off the coast, close, too close. And when it rips, it will displace so much ocean water that a tsunami could hit land in as little as 15 to 20 minutes. That's what models from Natural Resources Canada have shown. And it's why people in places like Tofino are in a race against the clock. Not hypothetically, literally. Vincent Hollingsworth, a lead surf instructor in the area, put it this way. If you're out at North Chesterman Beach, it could take 3 to 4 minutes just to get back to your car, and then you're in gridlock. He's not being dramatic. City crews tested the evacuation path from North Chesterman to Parley Place, the nearest designated safety zone sitting about 20 meters above sea level. On foot, walking fast, it took over 15 minutes. One of their producers ran and clocked in around 13, and that was without panic, without a crowd, without injured people in the mix. Now add summer tourism, add families, pets, chaos, and maybe even damage to the roads. Here's what gets overlooked. If you wait for a siren, you're already behind. That's why emergency officials are blunt. The ground shaking is the siren. That's your cue. And this isn't just modern advice. It's rooted in ancestral memory. Indigenous accounts from the Quiat and Nucha-Nulth peoples tell of waves that came fast and unforgiving, of elders telling their children to run the moment the shaking stopped. And now, science is backing them up. A 2017 simulation showed that in certain inlets, tsunami waves from nearby landslides could arrive in under 10 minutes. That's faster than emergency systems can even sound the alarm. That's why Tofino's local government is planning vertical evacuation towers, structures you can climb above the wave when there's nowhere else to go. They're modeled after towers in Japan. But here's the catch. Most of them aren't built yet, and that leaves a question that nobody wants to answer out loud. The aftermath, a city on the brink. Let's leave the beaches and head inland, straight to Vancouver. Bustling, modern, vertical. With over 2.6 million people living in and around the metro area, it's one of the most densely populated cities in Canada. Now ask yourself, what happens when a quake that strong hits a city that big? The answer, nothing good. Natural Resources Canada estimates the damage from a full Cascadia rupture could top $60 billion. But let's forget the price tag for a second. The real cost isn't in the money. It's in what people lose. Homes, neighborhoods, whole communities, gone. And not just from the first hit. Seismologist John Cassidy doesn't sugarcoat it. He says we're looking at hundreds, if not thousands, of fatalities, followed by aftershocks that could go on for years. Big ones, too. In Japan, after the 2011 quake, there were over 13,000 aftershocks within 24 months. Some were as powerful as magnitude 7. Now look at Vancouver's layout. This is a city built around bridges. Only two major ones, Lions Gate and Ironworkers Memorial, connect Metro Vancouver to the North Shore. If even one of them is out, whether from damage or just pending inspection, it creates a massive bottleneck. Emergency services can't get through. People can't get out. Supplies don't move. Time starts running out. And here's what most don't realize. Just because a building is still standing doesn't mean it's safe. Perry Adebar, a structural engineer, breaks it down. Even if a high-rise doesn't collapse, you can't just walk back in, he says. There's a red zone, an exclusion area, around every weakened structure. One damaged tower can shut down an entire block. And many of those towers, built in the 60s and 70s, they weren't designed for the kind of movement a Cascadia quake would unleash. And the current building code, it focuses on letting people escape, not stay. So sure, the walls might not fall, but they might not be livable for months or years. Vancouver has sent rescue teams to quakes around the world, Nepal, Turkey, New Zealand, to learn. But learning is one thing. Acting fast enough, that's the real test, because the problem isn't just the skyline. Foundations of failure, the ground we stand on. So let's talk about what Vancouver is really built on, because the skyline might look solid, but underneath, it's a different story. Much of the city sits on what engineers call soft ground, a mix of glacial sediment, old river delta deposits, and loosely packed soil. And while it doesn't sound terrifying, here's why it should be. When seismic waves hit solid bedrock, they pass through fast. But when those waves hit soft, wet soil, they slow down and grow taller. That's called site amplification, and it's one of the deadliest things that can happen during an earthquake. The shaking gets worse, longer, more violent. And here's the kicker. Canada's national building codes don't fully account for this. Just across the border in Seattle, engineers are required to model detailed ground conditions before construction. They factor in amplification. In Vancouver, not yet. The science is ahead. The policies haven't caught up. Carlos Molina Hutt, a seismic risk expert at the University of British Columbia, has been warning about this for years. His team has been pushing for updated codes to reflect what we now know about how the ground responds. But progress is slow, and high-rises, especially those built before 1990, they're even more vulnerable. Their irregular shapes can twist under extreme shaking. It's called torsional response. The building doesn't just sway, it contorts. That kind of movement can crack core columns, shear concrete, and bring down floors from the inside out. Even some of the priciest condos in downtown Vancouver meet only the minimum safety standard, safe enough to escape, but not safe enough to live in after a quake. That's the part nobody wants to put on a brochure. Then there's communication. Once the shaking starts, you can forget about your phone. Cell towers will be down. Power? Gone. Internet? Useless. No GPS, no texting, no alerts. That's why experts like Jackie Kloosterboer, a disaster preparedness specialist, push for low-tech survival, battery-powered radios, written family plans, preset meeting spots. Because when the lights go out, memory and muscle are all you've got. Right now, emergency officials are working on an earthquake early warning system. At best, it might give you 10 to 15 seconds of notice. Just enough to duck under a table, flip a gas switch, hit the brakes, but not enough to pack a bag, not enough to run. That part, that has to happen before the quake. Because even with new upgrades to bridges, water mains, and emergency protocols, the ground stops shaking. The glass has shattered. Power lines are down. You made it out. You're alive. But now what? Rebuilding from rubble. Lessons from the past. Because surviving the quake, that's just the beginning. What comes after is harder, slower, and for a lot of people, lonelier than they ever expected. First responders will jump into action, no doubt. Search and rescue teams will begin sweeping the city, but they won't be heading to every neighborhood. Not at first. Their top priorities? Hospitals, bridges, emergency infrastructure. That means if your house is damaged but still standing, you might not see help for days. Daniel Stevens, Vancouver's emergency management director, doesn't sugarcoat it. People in single-family homes might be on their own for a week or longer, he says. In other words, hope your roof holds up. And that's not paranoia. That's planning. Vancouver's current disaster plans now include mobile trauma clinics, drone-assisted search teams, and even water purification units. But here's the problem. They still won't be able to reach everyone. Not at once, not fast enough. Which is why the city's been pushing a simple, uncomfortable truth. Self-reliance is everything. Officials urge people to be prepared to survive alone for at least 7 to 14 days. That means food, water, medicine, and mental stamina. But survival isn't just about supplies. It's also about stories, specifically the ones we've been ignoring. Take the Tlaoquiat First Nation. Their history holds stories of giant waves that came without warning, of survivors who climbed to sacred hills and lived because they remembered, because they listened. Generations ago, these communities stopped building right on the shoreline, not because of modern science, because of ancestral memory, and it worked. Their stories were data, just in a different form. Recent studies show that many of their old evacuation routes line up exactly with today's scientifically designated safe zones. Their survival wasn't coincidence, it was culture, passed down. And across the Pacific, there's proof that preparation saves lives. In Kamaishi, Japan, during the 2011 tsunami, not a single schoolchild died. Why? They practiced, over and over, and when it hit, they didn't wait. They moved. Which brings us back to cities like Vancouver. Skyscrapers are impressive, tech is useful, but the communities that survive and recover are the ones that train like it's real, that drill, plan, and stick together. Because when the systems fail, your neighbor might be the one who saves you. Psychological earthquakes, what being ready really means. The shaking stops, but your heart doesn't. For survivors of massive earthquakes, from Christchurch to Mexico City, it's not the falling buildings they remember most. It's the silence afterward, the not knowing, the weight of everything suddenly gone, and the feeling that the ground might never be stable again. The trauma hits differently. People who lived through it report insomnia, panic when a truck rumbles by, or even nausea when a door slams too hard. It's a kind of fear that lives in the nervous system, long after the dust has settled. Now think about Vancouver. You survived the big one, but your building is red tagged. You're relocated. Maybe you can't find your relatives. There's no power, no phone, no water. Then 3 days later, an aftershock hits at 3 in the morning, strong enough to bring down whatever's still standing. That's not a movie. That's what people in Kobe and L'Aquila lived through for years. And Vancouver, it's not mentally ready. Emergency planners are starting to change that. These days, some go bags come with more than flashlights and food. They include mental health first aid tools, simple objects like journals, comfort items, and stress cards. Not gimmicks, grounding devices, especially for kids who process fear through the senses, not facts. Preparedness, it turns out, isn't just physical. It's psychological. The more you train, talk, and mentally rehearse, the less likely you are to freeze when it's real. Because in those moments, instinct is everything. And there's one detail that most people forget until it's too late. When the phones go down, how will you find your family? Vancouver's city guides suggest places like Vanier Park, open, central, and easy to identify. But here's the thing, it needs to be your plan. Walk it, choose the bench, tape it to your fridge. Because adrenaline will erase your memory when you need it most. Engineer Perry Adebar offers a final reminder that most people overlook. Buildings aren't made for you to go back in. They're made so you can get out alive. So preparing isn't about surviving the 5 minutes of shaking. It's about surviving the 5 weeks after. It's about having water when the taps don't work, light when the grid is dead, and a voice on the radio when the internet is gone. Because once the signal's out, information becomes survival. People with radios will know where the shelters are, where the medical teams are, where hope is. People without them, they'll be waiting, and waiting could cost lives. Here's the hard truth. The Cascadia earthquake isn't a myth. It's math. It will happen again. But whether it ends in chaos or something better, that part is still up to us. You can't stop the big one, but you can beat it to the punch. So, what would you do if the ground started shaking right now? Would you know where to run? Would your family? Because when the big one hits, it won't wait. Think you're prepared. Or are we all just hoping it never comes? Drop your thoughts below, and if you want more deep dives like this, hit that subscribe button. We've got more untold truths coming your way. Stay ready.